Hi, my name's Vince Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Schumann's Fourth Symphony. I'd like to go through this work exploring its structure. I do believe that if you can follow where you are in a piece of classical music, I think it can help you enjoy the piece and keep you engaged over the duration of the whole symphony. Now, Schumann's Fourth Symphony actually is really his second symphony. In 1841, Schumann composed these marvellous orchestral works: the First Symphony, the Spring Symphony, the Overture, Scherzo and Finale, which is practically a symphony without a slow movement. Parts of the he began working on the piano concerto as well. What became the piano concerto anyway, and also this symphony in D minor. 1841 must have been such a wonderful year for Schumann. You know, just that white hot streak of creativity. Artists yearn for that sustained inspiration. And it must have been an extremely happy time for Schumann, with this fecundity of his musical genius. And of course also he was newly married to Clara as well. Yeah, so it must have been a great time. However, the symphony listed as his second symphony in D minor wasn't as well received as his first symphony. It was premiered on the 6th of December 1841 in Leipzig, and it was on a programme with some piano pieces of Liszt, and Liszt was there performing them. And it seems that Liszt may have unwittingly taken perhaps some of the focus away from Schumann's own orchestral music. And Schumann, you know, he didn't think of it like that. He thought that there was something wrong with the piece itself. He thought there was something wrong with his Second Symphony. So he shelved it for 10 years. Eventually, in 1851, he rescored it, and in the meantime he'd composed his second and third, what we now call his second and third symphonies. So this earlier work, rescored, became his Fourth Symphony, and it was premiered on the 30th of December 1852 in Dusseldorf by Schumann himself. Now, which version of the symphony do you go for? The earlier one, the 1841 version, has got a lighter texture. Musically it's pretty much the same. Some of the transitions are different, some of the tempo markings are different, but it's got a lighter feel to it. And many people prefer that version today. Brahms preferred that version. In fact, he got it published, the earlier version, against Clara Schumann's wishes. But the later version has often been criticised for kind of stodgy orchestration, etc. But that's the version I know best, and that's the one I'm going to be covering in this video. Both versions are pretty similar anyway, to be fair. Now, Schumann's Fourth Symphony is very interesting in the fact that it needs to be viewed as a whole. Certain ideas come back throughout the work in true romantic fashion. The first movement is rather inconclusive, and you have to really get to the end of the finale to really have a full experience of this great work. Now, it begins, the first movement's in sonata form, and it begins with this very evocative introduction where we hear a theme actually associated with Clara, Schumann's wife herself. We begin with this. kind of moody, atmospheric opening, very romantic. And we'll hear snatches of that that kind of Clara theme in other parts of the symphony, not just the first movement. We then come into the first subject. Now, this movement's quite interesting in the fact that it's a sonata form movement without a recapitulation. There's the first subject, the second subject, development, and then a coda. And that's deliberate because Schumann's putting the weight of return, that sense of coming back to the end of the symphony itself rather than the first movement. But the first subject itself in D minor goes like this. Something like that. So that idea dominates this movement. It's essentially a monothematic exposition, actually. We have a transition. We're then into the second subject. We move from D minor into F major, how you'd expect, a relative major. And that first subject, melody, a kind of perpetual motion idea, and now in the major. And then over the top of that, in the woodwinds, we have and then there's just a brief Codetta based on that idea we hear both in the first and second subject groups. We then have a repeat of the exposition before in a development. The development begins in a really jarring and brilliant way. Remember that A across the orchestra at the introduction and the 4 octaves. Now we have an E flat, which is very unusual. We're kind of in D minor and F, and now we hear this E flat. That just sounds wrong, doesn't it? But it's brilliant. It's just like a slap in the face. I love that. And then after that E flat, we have that transition idea, you know. Pass through, and then back to. Really good stuff. Then we have that idea developed, as you'd expect, which forms a monothematic exposition. But in the midst of this development, which seems to take us through the keys like a clockwork machine, we then hear this new idea. This is perhaps the second subject, which has got lost and come back in the wrong bit of the symphony. It goes like this. And back to the first subject idea again. And that new idea is passed around as well, kind of joins this heady mix in this development. We then have this wonderful fortissimo climax, which is repeated with this dotted idea added. I love the woodwinds going da 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 dum da dum dum dum. It's a very exciting development. So we have these ideas kind of repeated in a development, 3 or 4 ideas, including that new melodic idea. And then you're waiting for the recapitulation, but it never happens. We have a coda instead, a short coda at the end based on that main idea. Then there's a pause, and without a break we're into the second movement, the Romanza, which is in a ternary form. It's in A minor, and this is very expressive oboe solo. Lovely melody. Then we have a return to that idea right at the beginning of the symphony, in the introduction to the first movement, which is said to represent Clara. Etc. Very beautiful music. That quote from the first movement brings us to the middle section of this romantic ternary form piece, where we have a violin solo. It goes like this. It goes through this part of the movement like a silken thread. Of thing, running all the way through. We'll hear a bit of this later in the symphony as well. You know, all these connections throughout the different movements. Then sure enough we come back to the A section again, but shortened this time. We just have the oboe solo, we don't have a return of the Clara theme in this restatement. Etc. We have a brief pause, and then we're into the scherzo with this stirring A section. Etc. So that's D minor. When we get to the trio section, we have a return to that idea from the solo violin, this time in B flat major. And so on. We have a return to A, and as Schumann likes to do, we have a return to the trio as well. That restatement of the B section of the trio takes us into the finale, and the finale is the movement where the weight lies of this symphony. It's very much kind of backloaded onto the final movement. We have an introduction based on that theme from the first movement, the main theme of the exposition. And then we go into the first subject of the finale, which is taken from the development of the first movement. So there, another example of Schumann just recycling parts earlier on from the symphony, reusing them again, giving that sense of that the whole music's woven of one cloth. We have a transition. And then we come to the second subject. genial idea. And we have a Codetta which is actually based on the development of the first movement as well. Schumann's really getting good value for his money here of his material. Then the development begins. Guess what? Just like the development of the first movement. And we have this kind of queasy, kind of almost hammer horror moment of melodrama. And then we have this, what sounds like the beginning of a fugue, based on the first subject of this movement, which of course is derived from the first movement of the whole symphony. So Schumann seems to take that da idea and kind of takes it for a walk through the whole orchestra. Then we eventually hit the recapitulation. Schumann omits the first subject in the recapitulation. We go straight into that charming idea, the second subject. This time in D major. Etc. We go into the Codetta, there's kind of rush of semiquavers, and we're brought into an exciting Coda, which rounds off this remarkable and economically, you might say, argued symphony. Thank you for watching. Please click like and subscribe if this is your kind of thing. And if you want me to look at any pieces in the future, please put them in the comments below. Thanks a lot. Bye.